You ever hear about a kingdom so outrageous that kings sent letters to it? Popes dreamed of alliances with it, and mapmakers gave a whole continent a space? A place of gold palaces, rivers of marvels, and a priest-king who might be descended from the Magi himself? That place has a name, Prester John, a mythical Christian sovereign who haunted the hopes and maps of Europe for nearly 400 years. Today we're going on an adventure, from medieval courtrooms and forged letters to Portuguese caravans and Ethiopian rock churches. By the end, you'll understand why an idea, even one that never existed, can change the course of history. Imagine Europe in the 12th century, fragmented, anxious, and repeatedly beaten back by waves of conquest. Crusaders dreamt of allies. Popes dreamed of allies. In this fevered dream of medieval geopolitics, word arrived, or so it seemed, of a Christian monarch in the Far East. John, a Christian sovereign and Lord of Lords. A letter, lavish in description, landed in the hands of emperors and bishops, claiming a vast kingdom of wonders, full of riches and power, pledged to Christ. The continent lit up with hope. Who was this man? Where was his kingdom? And why did that one letter lead to centuries-long obsession? Let me take you back to the beginning of the story, to the letter itself. Sometime in the mid-1100s, hundreds of documents circulated, known now as the Letter of Prester John, addressed to the Byzantine emperor and later to Holy Roman rulers. It read like a travel brochure pressed through a filter of medieval piety. Rivers of gems, palaces of gold, monstrous marvels, and a king who combined priestly holiness with imperial might. To many it was proof. Somewhere beyond the known world of Christendom still flourished, untouched by Muslim conquest and Mongol havoc. To others it was a useful fiction, hope dressed up as news. But whether true or false, the letter became gospel for a restless Europe. And here's the delicious twist. The origins of the tale are messy. Some trace the kernel to earlier stories about Christians in India, tales of St. Thomas and Nestorian communities. Others spot political utility, a rumor that could unify scattered rulers or justify a new crusading dream. Chronicles began to weave Prester John into their narratives. Travelers like Marco Polo and missionaries mentioned kingdoms in the East that could be made to fit the legend, while the Mongol conquest shifted where people looked, from India to Central Asia and later to Africa. Every twist in the map gave the rumor new life. Now imagine you're a medieval cartographer. You don't have Google Earth. You have fragments, letters, travelers' tales, and the desperate need to believe. The result? Maps that look like dreams, vast Prester John. Territories drawn where no one had actually been. By the 16th century, Antwerp's great mapmakers, people like Abraham Ortelius, had turned that dream into ink. Ornate maps labeling vast swathes of eastern Africa as the land of Prester John. Those maps didn't just record imagination. They reinforced it, guiding explorers and crown princes who still hoped for a Christian ally in the deep beyond. If you love stories like this, hidden empires, dramatic alliances, and the strange ways faith and fantasy shape history, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We make videos about the moments that remade Christianity, the untold corners of faith's history, and the wild tales that sent whole navies into the unknown. Stay with me. The next chapter gets stranger. Okay, back to the legend. Because here's the thing. The mapmakers weren't the only ones drawn to the myth. By the late 1400s and early 1500s, Portuguese explorers, who were cutting a new sea route around Africa to India, were told over and over about a Christian king somewhere beyond the Muslim world. Portugal wasn't just after spices. Portugal wanted allies. So in 1487, the crown sent secret envoys, men like Pêro da Covilhã, to find trade routes to India and to quietly inquire, is this mythical king real? Covilhã reached Ethiopia and found a Christian kingdom indeed, ancient and impressive, but nothing like the glittering fables. Still, it was enough. Suddenly, Prester John names were applied to Ethiopian emperors in European letters, and a new kind of contact began. Let me pause and paint the scene of Ethiopia, not imaginary, but spectacular in its own right. Think of Lalabella's rock-hewn churches. Entire churches carved downwards out of stone, places that feel like someone scooped a heart out of the mountain and carved cathedral there. To a Portuguese envoy arriving from the sea, this was an ancient Christian world, liturgy, bishops, saints, but one shaped by its own history, not European legend. Still in Europe, headlines read, Prester John contacted. The myth survived by folding reality into its contours. But why did Europe cling to a myth even as direct contact unfolded? Because myths do political work. For crusaders and kings, Prester John was an abstract ally who justified effort, funded voyages, and offered moral insurance. If a mighty Christian empire existed beyond the horizon, it could tip the balance in a centuries-long struggle across the Mediterranean and the Levant. So the search continued, through letters, embassies, missionary reports, and, crucially, through maps that stitch fantasy to fact. The search for Prester John became part of the larger European expansion into Africa and Asia. Let me tell you about one of the most human episodes in this story. Francisco Álvares, a Portuguese priest and chronicler who traveled to Ethiopia in the early 1500s. Álvares' accounts, presented to the Pope and later published, were among the first direct European accounts of Abyssinia, Ethiopia, circulated widely in Europe. His descriptions, sometimes admiring, sometimes bewildered, helped Europeans update their maps and imaginations. He described emperors, churches, and court life. But such eyewitness testimony had a strange power. It could both debunk a myth and feed it. Europeans kept calling the Ethiopian emperor Prester John, even as local Ethiopians shrugged at the name. In other words, the myth adapted. It swallowed whatever reality it met and kept on going. Now, a twist that reads like a novel. During the Mongol era, some chroniclers tried to link Prester John to Central Asian Christian tribes and clashes with Genghis Khan. Other accounts made him a descendant of the three Magi. Another wrapped him in the noble bloodline of King David. Each retelling remade Prester John into whatever Europe needed him to be. A Nestorian patriarch, a king of the East, a Western Christian ally, a distant emperor. The legend was a mirror that reflected medieval hopes, fears, and rivalries. But you might be wondering, did anyone ever find a Prester John? The short answer, yes and no. Explorers found Ethiopia, a powerful Christian kingdom with a long, proud history. They met emperors worthy of respect. But the mystical, jewel-strewn priest-king who ruled all the way from Persia to China, that was a story. The long European search shifted maps, altered diplomatic priorities, and even justified the sending of missionaries and soldiers. The legend's death was slow. 17th century scholars like Hiob Ludolf began to unravel the tale's threads, pointing out mismatches between the legend and Ethiopian reality. Gradually, belief waned, but the echoes of the myth shaped centuries of exploration and contact. Here's a scene I love imagining. An imperial cartographer in Antwerp, late 1500s, putting the finishing flourishes on a map. To the left, a strapwork cartouche with a flourish of Latin describing Presbytery Johannes, the land of Prester John. Elephants stamp the interior, and sea monsters thread the Atlantic. Buyers hang this map in halls and studies across Europe, where it shapes how people, policymakers, merchants, missionaries, picture the world. Maps are not passive records. They steer ambition. In that sense, the myth of Prester John is as real as any king. It made people sail, negotiate, and sometimes fight. We can also see a human cost in the story. Empires and explorers, emboldened by fable as much as fact, rushed into regions they barely understood. The Portuguese hoped for Christian allies against Islam. They also brought warfare, diplomacy, and sometimes cultural arrogance. For Ethiopians, the Portuguese presence brought both military aid and cultural tensions that would reshape internal politics. The legend's legacy is complicated. It sparked curiosity and connection, but it also fed colonial impulses. So what did the myth of Prester John ultimately teach Europe? And us? First, that stories can be political engines. The idea of a Christian ally somewhere beyond the borders pushed explorers into a world. It reshaped maps and diplomacy. Second, that myth and reality interact, not neatly, but messily. Eyewitnesses could confirm parts of the tale, while the tale itself remade the eyewitness's account. Third, that historical imagination has real-world consequences. Names on a map can become justifications for ships, missions, and treaties. If you listen closely, you'll hear another layer, the conspiracy angle. Think of how pre-modern information flowed. Letters, envoys, rumor. In that current, it was easy for a forged or embellished letter to become true by authority alone. Kings who wanted to inspire hope published letters. Map makers who needed authority inked names. The official Prester John became a sort of medieval viral meme, repeated and reinforced until it was more real in the European mind than in any capital court. It's a lesson about the power of narrative and why we should always ask, who benefits from the story being true? Now we come to the ending. The myth's decline didn't erase its legacy. By the time scholars applied rigorous critique, the age of exploration had already been set in motion. The caravans had run, the missionaries had arrived, and the maps had been drawn. Prester John, whether imagined in India, Central Asia, or the highlands of Ethiopia, left a trace, a trail of curiosity, contact, and consequence. Sometimes a lost kingdom is less about geography and more about the map it leaves in human hearts. So why tell this story now? Because it's not just a medieval curiosity. It's a mirror that shows how belief, politics, and imagination can shape the world. It's a cautionary tale about how powerful narratives, even false ones, can redirect treasures, ships, and lives. And it's an invitation to look at history not just as facts, but as stories that change those facts. If you enjoyed this voyage through myth, maps, and missions, do subscribe and join the journey. We dive into the lost corners of Christian history, the moments that reshaped faith, and the untold stories behind the headlines. Hit like, leave a comment. Tell us, which myth should we chase next? And if you want a shorter version of this legend for social clips, tell us and we'll make it. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the most influential kingdoms are the ones that never existed.